Chapter 5. Sheila and I returned to the cave to report the presence of the pterodactyl to the two other women. The cat-like warrior went right inside, but the smell of food stopped me in my tracks at the entry. The small clay pot was still on the outskirt coals of the fire, and all threats to the cave seemed distant once I took another deep drag of the incredible turkey dinner smell. The last meal I'd eaten was a pair of strawberry Pop-Tarts I hadn't even bothered to toast before I drove to work the morning I was abducted. I overheard Sheila mention the pterodactyl, then compared it to the orange birds, and finally she pointed to the food on the fire. That's when I realized I needed to be a part of their conversation, so I took a few steps into the cave. My hunger pangs spun up like a train's diesel engine, and the three beautiful women cocked their heads toward me at the interruption. Sorry about that. I'm kinda hungry," I said with a good-natured chuckle and a little boyish pride at the impressive protest by my stomach. The smell was overpowering, and I was in danger of floating into the air, drifting over to the cooking pot, and diving in head first like a cartoon character.
"Laugh it up, Male. The delicacy is not for you. You'll have to get your own,"
Trell spat. Okay. How do—" I began.
"Victor, please do not worry,"
Sheila replied.
"I caught this turtle for the benefit of all who live here. You are welcome to some. Sit and enjoy it, please."
Trell turned to study me, and I felt her eyes scour my body. After a few moments, she finally reoriented on the sexy feline woman.
"Sheila, before you sit down, I wanted to remind you it is getting late and we are out of water,"
Trell said while tapping one of her sandals against something hollow on the floor near the fire. I turned to Sheila and saw exhaustion flicker across her beautiful features, but then she looked at me, and her eyes were determined.
"I haven't forgotten,"
Sheila replied as she bent over and picked up a medium-sized clay pot that might have come from my mom's kitchen. She held it upside down as if to prove it was empty, and then carried it toward the door. I gently grabbed her arm before she could get too far. "You have to go back outside? Now? Where are you going?" I stammered.
"To get water from the stream. There is a drip of water in the back of this cave, but not enough for all of us. 3 times a day I go out to fill this. I have been away from the cave for too long and our supply is gone,"
Sheila explained. "You mean you just rescued me, brought me to your safe home, and now you have to go right back out into the wild? Don't you have time to recharge with some food?" I asked as I tried to ignore the rumbling in my own stomach.
"Trail is correct.
Sheila replied.
We must gather water from the creek before it gets too late in the day. That is when the forest becomes dangerous, so I must go as soon as possible."
"How far is it?" I asked.
"It's only a half-mile through the trees, but delays are common if I see wandering predators. There will be more threats if I do not leave immediately."
"And you expect me to sit here and eat while you fetch a pail of water? That doesn't sound fair at all," I said while pointing to the fire and the simmering pot of goodness.
"You are tired. You need rest,"
Sheila said, as if they were dull facts. "I'm not... Well, yeah, I'm tired," I said. "But we're all beat down. You're living in a cave in the forest. You take care of your friends. There is no way I'm gonna sit here while you take a risk for me. I'm coming with you."
"Ugh, take the mail then,"
Trell said with her voice full of frustration that kinda surprised me. It almost sounded like she had wanted me to stay while Sheila left. The blonde Catwoman looked at me with her beautiful eyes. Then she nodded to me with gratitude, and we walked over to the spears near the front door.
"One of us needs to carry this while the other guards,"
Sheila instructed as she held the small pot. It had no handle or lid, so there was no easy way to carry it and grip a spear in the same hand. It would be even more cumbersome when full.
"As the male, you may wish to carry the spears and protect me,"
Sheila said quietly, as if explaining the rules of a game. I glanced at Galmine and Trell, waiting for a snappy comeback from the Spider-Woman, but she must not have heard Sheila's use of the word male. Her statement tapped into my man brain in a way I hadn't felt since snagging Ernie the snake at Lacey's pool party. I could protect this beautiful woman in this carnivorous dinosaur world. I could be her hero, even if the task were something as basic as collecting water. My gamer's brain argued it was better to align the skills of each player so everyone was utilizing their best assets. I'd witnessed Sheila's prowess at slaying that mega crocodile and knew her assigned skill was critical strike. Even if I was the kind of asshat who said women were second-class citizens, which I sure as hell wasn't, I'd be a fool to try to compare myself to her when it came to fighting with spears.
On the other hand,
Sheila continued,
it would be useful for you to see my methods and learn my route before taking on the task of protecting the water carrier.
Yep, I don't really care who leads or fights as long as we have the best person doing it. Right now, that person is you, I said while reaching to get the pot from her.
Thank you for trusting me,
Sheila said as she handed me the pot.
It is very dangerous out there.
She selected the wooden spear with crocodile blood on it, as well as a second one for her other hand. Then she strode out of the cave, but waited at the top of the ramp as I grabbed one of the remaining spears. The one I took was as tall as my chin and arrow straight. They were all impressive weapons, considering she didn't appear to have any tools around.
The stream is that way,
Sheila said, while pointing straight out into the redwood forest, almost directly below the pterodactyl watching our cave.
We will run for a distance, and then we will stop at a hidden safe spot to watch and listen for predators. If there are none, we will run for another period until we find a place to stop.
You mean predators like that bird thing up in the tree? I replied with a little nervous laughter.
Yes, and worse. It would be best if we could hide or climb a tree, but if we must, we will fight.
She angled one of her spears in my direction as emphasis. I'll do my best, I offered.
Do not worry. On my planet, women are expected to fight to the death to protect the males. I will ensure you make it back.
No way, Sheila. I respect your customs, but it's the women who should be protected at all costs. That's how it is where I come from. It's called chivalry.
To die in combat is an honor, Victor. Women in my world may not hold land or choose who to marry, but we may always choose to fight and die for those who are worthy.
I didn't think dying in combat was an honor, but it wasn't the time or place to argue. She didn't invite me to discuss it either. She was already scanning the surrounding forest with her hunter's eyes, and my heart started to race when I thought about the danger ahead of us. Let's just hope it doesn't come to that, I said after a slight hesitation.
Are you ready?
She asked, as if the game was about to begin. I nodded grimly and looked beyond her at the jungle, but who was ever ready to run into a world full of dinosaurs? Those green-feathered monsters could have been hiding behind any of the redwoods in front of me. I shook my head to get rid of my thoughts and looked up at her. She nodded and began trotting down the ramp. Her long hair flowed and bounced to each side of her tightly packaged glutes. 99 times out of 100 I'd have found that super hot, but this was the one deadly exception. I needed to focus on not getting eaten by dinosaurs right now. When we reached the forest floor, she picked up her pace and ran directly for one of the largest trees, about 100 yards away. I had trouble keeping up with her at first, but her sprint slowed to a fast jog as we entered the grove of ancient redwoods. I'd taken an elementary school field trip to a similar forest back in California, but I didn't remember much about it, other than the trees were hundreds of feet tall, and it took most of our class to link hands all the way around one of the bases. The giants in front of us looked just about the same size. Sheila ran directly into a large clump of bushy green ferns mixed with long cattail stalks. When we reached the trunk of the first tree, she squatted down in the leafy undergrowth and motioned for me to do the same. I set the water pot next to me and tried to calm my hammering heart and heaving lungs. Even though we hadn't run very far, my breathing was a freight train of noise compared to Sheila's.
Shh, just listen,
she whispered. The sun was low in the sky, and it cast its orange rays almost sideways into the great forest. Some of the rays met Sheila's soft face and caught her golden eyes just right. I admired her watchful gaze as those shimmering feline eyes scanned the deadly but beautiful forest around us. If we weren't in mortal danger and if I wasn't in dinosaur land, I would have whipped out my camera and snapped a picture of her. Except my smartphone was sitting on the passenger seat of my truck back on Earth. Even if I did have my phone, it wasn't like I'd get reception here and there would be no way to charge it. As my heart rate and breathing slowed, I began to hear the sounds of the forest around us and smell the sense of abundant life. Birds squawked from high above, crickets and cicadas provided a constant background hum. The smell reminded me of family camping trips in the woods. With the familiar ferns and redwood trees, I could have been back in Southern California, rather than a world of ancient dinosaurs, and I was amazed at how close to normal it all seemed. Pine needles were everywhere on the ground, and I absently rubbed my hands through them while waiting. Of course, my curiosity was rewarded with a dab of sticky sap on my fingers that I promptly rubbed on my pants. Giant dragonflies and horseflies bounced from leaf to leaf or flew around each other in aerial dogfights. I felt an itchy pinprick on my neck and then groaned as I slapped the tiny mosquito away. It was one piece of home I wished the aliens would have skipped, because I'd already been bitten a dozen times since I came here.
Those little ones are the worst. They are everywhere,
Sheila whispered. Roars in the distance reminded me of even bigger threats. It might have been a Tyrannosaurus Rex telling the jungle it was in charge, or one of God knows how many other carnivorous hunters and killers. Less powerful roars, chirps, and growls carried on the wind from far away, like the background soundtrack from a packed Jurassic zoo. It sounds chaotic out there. What are you listening for? I asked as quietly as I could. It took her a few moments to turn and respond.
The best hunters will remain quiet as they stalk you, but they cannot stay silent. I am listening for the sound of brush or ground clutter being disturbed. Sometimes it is the lack of sound which gives warning. If the forest itself falls silent, beware.
I gave her a thumbs-up sign, hoping the gesture made sense to her. A minute later, she seemed satisfied that we weren't being stalked and motioned for me to follow her again. Sheila kept our path close to the base of the trees. I didn't know her exact reason, but the undergrowth seemed to accumulate there, so I guessed she used the ferns as our cover. We ran in and out of several more clumps of the green brush, always heading in a line. After several more minutes, Sheila turned us a bit, and we went toward a massive redwood, which probably fell over decades ago. The base of the trunk had come out of the soil, and the severed roots poked out from the dead giant like a fiery torch lying on its side. The ruined upper branches were almost a football field away. She jumped over some rotting bark and ran into the downed tree through a gaping hole in its side near those roots. Our footfalls echoed into the empty space, and bugs of all sizes and shapes scurried into hidden layers as we arrived. I felt like a dinosaur-sized woodpecker had drilled through solid wood from one side of the tree's trunk to the other. The sunset leaked through numerous smaller cracks and holes, giving a hazy glow to the earthy interior.
There's a stream,
Sheila said as she gestured to the hole leading out of the hollowed-out tree. I got up next to her to see a fertile waterway that reminded me of something from Bambi. A small, flowing creek ran over large boulders as it meandered through the redwood grove, and it seemed to attract flowering plants, cattails, and ferns like a magnet in the junk drawer. A little pool of clear water sat almost directly in front of us, and it presented a happy pastoral scene, fit for a small talking deer and his woodland friends. A few little blackbirds pecked in the mud of the far shore, but there were no big dinosaurs anywhere in sight. Still, Sheila studied the scene for a full 5 minutes while I waited and watched too. I had just set the pot down when she spoke.
I believe it is safe. I can see and hear nothing of concern.
I gulped, aware of what was next.
You can leave your spear here. I will stand by the water while you fill the container,
she said. Sounds good, I said dryly.
And do not forget to drink from the stream while you are there,
she said.
Though, not too much. We might have to run.
Sheila gestured for me to wait a moment, and then she ducked through the front hole of the tree. I watched her athletic body leap up and over a few prominent rocks, and then she stopped at the peak of a small boulder right at the water's edge. She crouched there and then looked around cautiously before waving me over to her.